David Ellis is a judge and an award-winning author for Line of Vision. He's the author of 9 novels of crime fiction, as well as 5 books he's co-authored with James Patterson. In December of 2014, Dave was sworn in as the youngest serving justice of the Illinois Appellate Court for the First District. And he lives outside of Chicago with his wife and 3 children. So other than that, he's not doing much big and awesome in the world. Holy cow. Can I start off with the first question? So looking at your resume, and of course, being a judge is, for anybody who's a lawyer, that is such the pinnacle. And getting there, you had some just fabulously big career-defining matters that you handled. So, plus you're married and you have 3 children, which is a lot.
Yeah.
How in the heck, when did you start writing? How did you do all of this? Because you're at the top of both careers.
Oh, well, that's really nice, Barbara. And thank you guys for having me. I always say I was a writer before I was a lawyer. I was a writer when I was a kid, and I stopped writing only because they stopped asking me to write in school. We stopped having curriculum for creative writing. And you got up to maybe middle school and then high school and then onward. I was a finance major in college, and then I went straight to law school. And so there's a long stretch where nobody said, hey, write a short story, write something creative. I was just doing the homework that was put in front of me and playing sports and I suppose chasing girls. And onward and upward to law school where you have no time to do much of anything. And I'd been a lawyer for a couple of years when I had one of those moments that all of us have had where we're on vacation, right? We're taking stock of our life. We have our toes in the sand. We're watching the sunset, drink in your hand, and you're kind of just thinking, what am I doing with my life? Is everything good? Am I happy? And I realized that I had stopped writing and I didn't have a good reason why. So that's when I made my decision to start writing for the first time. I made a deal with myself, not just that I would think about it or write a few chapters, but I would actually see an entire process through from beginning to end writing. And that first book took me maybe 3 years to write. But I taught myself how to write. I wrote a lot of bad fiction, right? I wrote bad stuff and said that's bad. Then I wrote something better and said, okay, you're getting there. I was just building up muscles. Isn't that what we do? It's like lifting weights and building up muscles. I built up my writing muscles. And, once I embarked on that, I knew I wasn't going to give up my legal career. And so it was an hour, maybe 2 hours at night or very early in the morning. It's the only time I can fit it in.
That so closely mirrors what I've been doing for the last couple of years. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got a busy practice in Birmingham, and you've got clients all day, and you've got all these demands on you, and that's got to come first, right? Your clients come first, and so then you just fit it in around that somehow.
So when I started writing fiction, I realized I love this, and it's incredible, and it's immediately rewarding. I mean, even though some of it's not good right away, it's exhilarating because you created a thing that didn't exist before. But I also found that it was so much more difficult than I had expected, and it took so much more mental energy than any other kind of writing that I do, even though I'm writing all day. What was your experience like with that?
Well, exhilarating, I can't think of a better word than exhilarating. That is how I felt too. And I looked forward to every opportunity. I looked forward to every evening for those couple hours or getting up early before anyone else is awake, that's what I do now. I get up really early in the morning and work for about 3 hours before. Now it's 3 hours, 3.5 hours. I try to get in before the rest of the house is awake. So I'm getting up in the middle of the night when most normal people are asleep. But it was hard, and you do just have to. It helps having some confidence if you've been writing, even if you've been a legal writer. You do know that you have some ability to put pen to paper, so to speak, and so you start with maybe a little bit of confidence. But the only skill I had when I started was the ability to recognize bad writing of my own. It's hard to be objective, right? It's hard to sometimes realize how your stuff is going to be perceived by others. And you really, the first time you hand it over to somebody else to read, it's nerve-wracking, right? You feel like you're putting your whole soul out to them to mock and ridicule. And you always learn a lot, don't you? You learn a lot when they come back with the comments. So you know, all I can think of when I think of writing is trial and error and just continuing to do it and just having faith that you would get better. And I slowly felt myself kind of getting the hang of it and realizing I could do this, and continuing to read really good fiction, because really good writing, it's not that you copy what you're reading, but it inspires you, and you see sort of a style, you see sort of a way they have. You know, I write suspense, and so I read a lot of good suspense fiction. You know, we talked a moment ago off camera about Scott Turow. You know, Scott, I'll read his books over and over again because they're masterpieces, and you hope that'll ooze in, right? So it's taking all those things and screwing up a lot and just continuing to try and having some faith in yourself, right?
Wow. So, I mean, I'm still thinking about you getting up at 3 in the morning or whatever you do. I used to get up at 4:30, and I thought, wow. So, yeah, kudos to you on that, because that is hard. And a lot of this is just about doing it, not thinking about it, not worrying about it, just sitting and doing it. So, in terms of the doing it part, are you a plotter or a pantser? And if you say you're a pantser for Look Closer, I am going to have to leave the screen for a minute and go scream and come back. But how do you structure yourself?
I try as hard as I can to be a plotter. What I used to say is I approached a book like a lawyer would approach a lawsuit. So Barbara, you used to practice. Jeremy, you're still practicing. If you're going to trial, the first thing you're going to think about is your closing argument. What do I want to be able to tell the jury at the end of the case? What's my best story? And then you build everything in the trial, and even in the pre-trial discovery, you build everything towards being able to say those things. And so I viewed a book that way. I knew a basic concept for how it was going to begin, and I knew the ending. I would try to have a big surprise at the ending, and it was the middle, 400 pages that were always the part I had to figure out. But the more I can plot, the better off I am. But I've never plotted out a book without changing my mind, sometimes seriously changing my mind in the middle of it. James Patterson is a guy, obviously who I write with, who is very big on plotting in advance. So he'll outline an entire book before we've written a word. Like literally, he thinks of every chapter as a scene. So it's more like thinking of it scenes in a movie or something. And he'll have 95 or 100 scenes, and he'll do a 3 or 4 line summary of what each scene will look like and what he wants from that scene. And then I'll start trying to execute it. I can't do that. I have tried to do that. He's even let me outline some of our books. He said, why don't you take a shot at this, Dave? And I'll do it. And he'll say, okay, that's a good start. And then he'll wave his magic wand and make it 20 times better. So, I've heard of people who don't plot at all, the complete seat of the pants, the pantsers. I don't understand those people. I don't know. I wish I had that skill. It's a combination for me. But with a book like Look Closer, I changed my mind a few times, and I had to, go back after I came up with ideas and make them fit. So I think in terms of efficiency, you would probably say my writing of that book was very inefficient. And it took me 2 years to do. It took me longer than I usually give myself. And that's probably because it was COVID. And I had not written one of my own books for several years. I had a large gap of time there once I became a judge where I did not write my solo books. And so I had sort of walked away from a publishing contract, honestly. And every year Putnam would check in with me and say, are you back yet? And I said, not yet. I'm not ready yet. And when this book idea came to me, I didn't have some immediate time pressure on me. So, when you're in, though, you got to write a book a year sort of thing. When you're in some kind of a serial expectation from your publisher, that is a very different kind of stress. I had no stress on me in terms of the time I got that book done. So it allowed me to be, I guess you'd say, inefficient.
Speaking of that book, I like that it took you so long because it is such a complex book and so many twists and turns. I also found the fact that it's taking place, much of it takes place right now and a little bit in the future. I thought that was so clever and made it so immediate for me. How did you come up with the idea to do that?
Well, I realized once I started plotting it that I had to show you clues. It all kind of revolves around a murder that you see it on the first page of the book. So I'm giving nothing away. And I realized that we had to see some of the clues after the murder through the eyes of a detective, a very good, underestimated, but very talented police detective in this small town. And then to go back in time at what led up to the murder and have those two things blend together. It's a device you don't always use. You have to make all these choices as an author. And I don't think it was the first thing I had planned, but as I started doing it, I said, it would be really cool to show the reader some things before they actually happen chronologically, and then go back and you'll say, oh, that's what that was. That's just another way to tease. It's another way to do what, we like to call feed and starve, feed them a little bit of information so they want more, but then say, oh, you're going to have to wait a little bit for more. It's just, it's one of these devices, and it just kind of worked in this book for me.
Really did.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is I listened to your interview on Writers Inc. a few weeks ago, and you talked about how it's been a few weeks, so I'm hoping I get this right, that in some of your earlier novels, you had started with characters and developed your characters, and the story came about around them. And then the novels that you co-authored were much more driven by the plot and the story, and that you were getting back to writing from starting with the character. And I just wanted you to talk about the difference there and how that workflow works for you, and if you have a preference between the two.
Yeah, no, that's right. The first book I ever wrote, Line of Vision, which gave me a nice launch and won the Edgar. That book was conceived when I thought of the character, and I spent a long time thinking about a character, and then I built a plot around him. And after that, I came on with a tiny bit of a splash. This is like literally the turn of the century. I believe this was the year 2000, and suddenly at Penguin Putnam, I went from being a nobody to a slightly bigger fish in a gigantic pond. And then it comes the book contract, and let's get a book out a year. And they said, we want you to write legal thrillers because you're a lawyer. And, I thought, okay, legal thrillers. So I need a murder mystery with some courtroom drama at the end. And that's all plot stuff. That's not thinking about who your character is going to be. And I obviously tried to write those books with interesting people, but my focus did not begin with that. And so, I realized that what was, I thought, special about my first novel, Line of Vision, I mean, it does end with some Perry Mason courtroom dramatics, and I think they're well done. And people like us should be pretty good at writing those things because we are lawyers. I am good at writing those things. But what made that book special was the character. And I realized, okay, what I did when I was writing Look Closer is I stepped back, because it had now been a while. I was writing with Jim, and Jim steers the ship with his books. He gives me, by the way, a ton of leeway to make changes and to have my own style. But this was the first time writing my own book in a long time. And I thought, what do I want to read? What would I want to watch on my phone if I had, some streaming series? And I thought, I want to follow the life of a really twisted, spooky, strange person. That's what I like, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the people that I'm interested in. And I realized I could build a story around a person like that. And that would be the most interesting thing I would want to read. So that's what I wanted to write. And I've realized that has become far more important to me again. People always say, what's more important, plot or character? We've probably all been to book events or, conventions, and you're on a panel and they feed you these questions. And what's more important, plot or character? And I usually reject the premise that you should have to choose, because obviously if you're not getting both right, you're not doing a good job. But I would say I'm 60-40 now on character. If I don't care about the person, then I don't see why the story is going to move me. And on the other hand, if I'm incredibly invested in the person, it takes a little bit of the pressure off the plot.
Yeah.
And right. And so to me, I am now doing that. I'm now starting with characters. I just am finishing up my next book, and it all began with a character.
When you have a character that you really like, do you find it difficult to make extraordinarily bad things happen to them?
No, I don't at all. I find it extraordinarily bad not to have something bad happen to them. I don't know why I'm drawn to the idea of turmoil and difficulties and psychological drama and stress, but I find that that's what motors me when I'm enjoying something that's well done, and I can't allow my characters to stay pristine. My publisher always wanted me to write a series, right? And you people on this podcast know why, because that's good marketing. And if you love a series character, then you're going to read all the books. It's good marketing, it's good business. But I like to crash and burn my characters. I don't really like to see much left of them when it's over. Doesn't mean you can't bring them back. The only time I wrote a series, I wrote a 4-book series in the middle of my solo writing about a character named Jason Coleridge. It began with The Hidden Man. And the reason I did that was he was a character who had already crashed and burned. And now he was coming up from the ashes. And I thought that was an interesting way to watch him rebuild his life after some horrible tragedy. So, but yeah, I've never been a big fan of like, if you watch a TV show that's a serial where somebody solves crimes, Murder, She Wrote. I mean, those are fun. I like Murder, She Wrote, Angela Lansbury and all that, but she's never herself in jeopardy. She's just figuring out crimes. That was only part of it for me. I'm much more interested in the character suffering, whatever that says about me.
Well, whatever it says about you, it says the same about me, because I've friends who still haven't forgiven me for the way my first book ended up, because it's just, I don't I don't mind doing extraordinarily ornery and bad things to the characters, because I think it has to happen, like you said. And I have had a relatively easy life, but I am drawn to the darker side of human nature when it comes to writing. And that's what I want to explore. And that's the things that are interesting to me. So I can identify with that.
Yeah, that's the same. I've had a blessed life. I've had a very undramatic life, full of good luck and beautiful family and nice twists and turns in my life. And I feel blessed. But I've always been drawn to the extremes in life that I never personally, experienced. I was always very interested in people who broke the rules, because I was not one of them. I was a rule follower. I was the good student, the good son. I did what my parents told me, but I was always sort of, I thought it was sort of romantic to think of the people who, I admired in some strange way, the people who didn't do that.
Gosh, that is so interesting to hear, especially because I always have to have a happily ever after in all my books.
But that's great. That's what's great about literature. That's why we all write different stuff.
It's something different. So tell me, I know we're all curious, we're about out of time, but tell us about how this magical, enviable partnership with Patterson came about. That it sounds like it works very well for you.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing. My agent at the time had previously run Warner Books, which was the parent company that published Jim. So he was Jim's publisher. And then he became a literary agent, and he signed me, and they would have dinner every now and then. And when Larry Kirschbaum was my agent at the time, when Larry first became an agent, he was having lunch with Jim, and Jim was asking him about what's going on? Who are your clients? And he mentioned me. And Jim had read my first book, Line of Vision. He'd been, even though he didn't know me, he'd been nice enough to give me this blurb, and he loved it. He loves that book. And so he said, I know Dave Ellis. He wrote Line of Vision. I love that book. And he started talking about the book to Larry. And so at that point, Jim had started having co-authors. And so Larry comes to me one day and says, would you like to co-author a book with James Patterson? And frankly, my first reaction was a little bit of fear and anxiety. And I said, that's really flattering. And he's a bestseller and I'm nobody, but I'm not sure I can I don't write like he does. And he said, call him and talk to him, and then you decide. And then he followed up by saying, but don't be an idiot. So, because, right, who's going to say no? So I called Jim and I said, I'm super flattered, but I don't know how to write a James Patterson book. And he said, I'll never forget this. He said, we're not writing a James Patterson book. We're writing a James Patterson, David Ellis book. And I want you to bring I know your skill set. I know what you can do. I want you to be yourself within the story framework and within the way I like to do things, the short chapters and all that. And my style fits very neatly into that. And it's been nothing but a collaboration. I mean, he's great. He knows writing so well. So, if you ever have to deal with an editor who maybe doesn't have the experience level you have as a writer, well, I have an editor who has way more experience and is way smarter than me when I'm working with Jim. So I'll write something and show it to him, and he'll make comments, and I'll feel like I'm taking a little class every time he calls me to talk about the stuff we wrote. And he'll make these observations, and I'll think, how the hell did I not think of that? Now, how did I not see that? But that's the great thing. We're always learning. But, other times a couple books we wrote, I completely changed the outline. I said, I've got an idea. I want to go in a different direction. And he said, give it a shot. If it's no good, then it's no good. But if it works, that's cool too. Like, he doesn't care whose idea it was. He cares about the ultimate product. And so he's been so easy he's the calmest, nicest person. And he's brutally honest. If he doesn't like something, he'll say, I don't like this. But he will do it in such a sweet way and such a laid back way. It's been like one of the best experiences of my life.
Are there things that you can identify that you are taking away from the collaborations and applying to your own writing that you going forward, this is going to make me a better writer because I do X now?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't even begin to describe. I'm a big fan of short chapters, which if you look closer, they're short chapters. The book is so long because there's so many chapters. It's really not that long of a book, but it looks thick when you look at it because it's got a bunch of tight chapters. The idea behind short chapters is, let's keep the pace going. It makes the pace go quicker. It makes you say as much as you can in 1,200 words. So with Jim, it's 1,200 words. That's his rule. And I find myself doing a word count on every chapter now. And I don't personally hold myself to 1,200, but I pay very close attention if I'm going over 1,200. And you're not going to see any chapters that are going to be 2,500 words because you can break that up, and even if it's the same scene, you can break a scene in half. If it keeps the pace going, it's more enjoyable for the reader. When you're writing the kind of books that we write, suspense novels, pace is incredibly important. So I guess that's the one big thing that I've completely learned from him. And the other thing that I always think of now because of him is this interesting? Is this scene interesting? Is this character interesting? Or is this a wooden character? He's always talking about being fresh and different and interesting. And he doesn't care if the chapter that I'm turning into him is sad or scary or thrilling or heartbreaking or romantic, but it's got to be something with an exclamation point. And I found myself cutting so much more out of my books and demanding so much more of myself to try to always be thinking, am I entertaining the reader at all times? I used to think, okay, I've got these big plot points and they're islands. And between those big islands, I have to do some factual predicate in some other chapters. Jim would say, yeah, get the factual predicate down. Obviously, you have to tell a story in a linear way, but no small little stones. They're all interesting stones. Don't waste a chapter. Nothing should be there if it's not entertaining. So I've been much more demanding of myself.
And it sounds like it's so reader oriented, and like it should be. I mean, but I think writers get so in our own heads sometimes about art and what art means that a lot of writing loses its focus on what engages the reader and keeps them involved in the story.
I mean, that's 100% true. That's exactly what Jim would say. There will be times where he'll call me and he'll talk about some passage and he'll say, okay, well, this was really well written, Dave. And then there's a but you're slowing the pace down. You know, this is too much for the reader. That you enjoy this, but this is not, you know, you like talking. Sometimes I'll wax on a little bit about the law. And he'll say, that's interesting, but can we cut that down? We're losing the flow. We're losing the pace. We're losing the focus of the chapter. Remember what this chapter is about. You know, this chapter is about X. So let's have it all be about that. He's always thinking of the reader. That's the only thing he thinks about. He always says, we're not here to win awards. We're here to entertain people.
That's really interesting. So the novel that I'm working on right now, the protagonist is an insurance coverage lawyer. And we don't talk much about it. That's not the point of the story, but it's going to be relevant. And so there's this scene where he's meeting with some insurance executives so we can talk about coverage. And I just need to establish his expertise. And so I sent it to the person who reads it before everything else, who's also a lawyer. And she said, look, I had to laugh when I was reading this because I know what you're trying to do, but it kind of felt like I was sitting in a CLE. And so, like, I know when I hear that has to undergo some massive structural changes to how we get to doing what I need the chapter to do. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, and so then you start breaking into devices. Like, is there a way I can, if you need to give this information to people, is there a way you can do it that would be interesting? And then think, how would I make it interesting to somebody who knows nothing, doesn't even know what coverage means, you know? And could I make it funny? Could I have him trying to explain it to people while they've had a few drinks and so people are cracking wise? Or could I do it where he's explaining it to a child? So he has to really dumb it down. You look for devices. I mean, that's what Jim would say, you know, like, this is boring me. So, you know, nobody wants to know this. You remember, like, you ever read Michael Crichton novels? I know Michael Crichton's been gone for a while. Like, that was a guy who had a different way of writing, and he would explain the hell out of a topic. And you'd read a book like his and you'd know all about how to fly an airplane, or all about dinosaurs, or all about, he did a book on employment discrimination.
Just last week, I read Dragon Teeth by Michael Crichton, which is set in the 1870s, and it's about these guys who are paleontologists. And I hadn't read one of his books in 20 years.
Right.
But my goodness, it was, because this one was published in 2017 after he had already passed, but it was riveting. It was amazing. I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. It's hard to do. It's hard to talk about all that stuff and still be interesting. And that's not really the kind of stuff I write, but he had a unique ability to do that. There's always a way to do it. I mean, if it's important enough to the story, then, you know, you've got to find a way. I hate to say the phrase dumb it down unless I'm talking about a child, but I don't want to insult readers, but, you know, you find a way to make boring stuff interesting if you have to put it in, or break it into a couple of different times in the book so they can put those two pieces together rather than one long exposition. You know, you look for ways to do it. And it's good that you're doing something that I don't do enough of, which is share it with others. I don't do that very much when I'm writing. I don't workshop it. I don't have a workshop. I have my wife, who sometimes has time to read it, and then I just give it to my publisher and hope they like it. I mean, but that's good if you've got people who can stop you in that and say, well, this is slowing down a little bit for me. It's a little too dry, or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Well, as we get ready to close this down, so we want to be really cognizant of your time. I want to make sure you have an opportunity to tell people where to find you, follow you if you're on social media. I don't know if you're active on that or not, but where they can find Look Closer and your other books.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, my website is my name, davidellis.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. David Ellis author, I believe, is usually my title. Some combination of David Ellis and author. And it's social media has been really, I'm not a big fan of social media, but I've really gotten into the book side of social media. There's a real active following, especially on Instagram is amazing. And I'm new to Instagram. And I've met a whole world of bookstagrammers who are really, their enthusiasm is infectious. It's been really fun.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I am not good at the social media side of it. Barbara is very good at it. And
I
so
saw that.
yeah, I follow her to see what I need to be doing that I'm not doing.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the same. I don't profess to be good at it. And they say, you know, it's hard when you're a judge. You can't, you don't want to talk about too many things, and you don't want to necessarily post a lot about where you live, security issues. I will occasionally put my children on, but I try to put them in settings like here we are at a baseball game, or here my kids are at the camp, the music camp they go to, which is far from home. And so it's weird because I have that dynamic. We talked off camera a little bit about using a pen name. I don't use a pen name. So author David Ellis is Judge David Ellis. And so, these days you want to be a little cognizant of that. But yeah, the people who are good at social media have a real advantage. Barbara, I wish I was as good as you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been hard fought, I'll tell you. Lots of hours.
Yeah. Oh, it's a ton of work. It's a second job.
It is, really, truly.
Or a third job if you already have two, like you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, and there's a lot to take away from and think about later as I apply it to my own writing. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate that. You guys were so great to talk to. Thank you.
I'm affirming that movie for Look Closer.